Welcome to the Smart Publishing Impact Series. I'm Renée Lautermilch, Chief Editor at Smart Publishing, and this is the podcast where we explore all things writing, publishing, and the impact of storytelling. In each episode, I'll share insights and strategies to help you navigate the book journey, whether you're writing, publishing, or already an author. Plus, you'll hear from inspiring authors who are using their book to change lives. And if you're passionate about storytelling and ready to make an impact, be sure to subscribe, rate, and review. Now let's get started. Hey, welcome back to the Smart Publishing Impact Series. I'm Renée Lautermilch, Chief Editor for Smart Publishing, and today's episode is another solo episode. I just ran right into it. I was sitting here, I was writing some notes for a little bit, and I was like, I'm just going to talk to you guys today about what I'm thinking about. I'm not going to try to make it too structured. I actually took a week off last week, so busy with a lot of the author projects that I'm working on that I just really needed the time to not have to focus on my blog and my podcast. And I already had one queued up in advance anyways. So this week, I'm like trying to get back into the groove, get back into the habit. And my brain is just going in 1,000 different directions, including, looking over my shoulder and thinking, for those of you who watch this on video, I should probably move the cat scratcher somewhere else. That's not exactly doing much for my background here. So that's not what this episode is about. Anyways, this episode is about a couple things. I want to talk about the role of an editor. This is something that I've touched on lightly in the past, but I thought it would be helpful to do a bit of a deeper dive into it. And I also want to talk about a subject that stems from the role of an editor, which is the role of collaboration in writing a book, and how important it is to be collaborative in that process, and how collaboration truly leads to the best outcome possible. So let's get started at the very top, the role of an editor. I'm a chief editor, right? So what do? I do it all. I think that specializing in a certain area of editing really doesn't make sense when it comes to the publishing world, because every author is going to have different needs. You're going to have some authors who are really honed on their writing craft and have a lot of experience with writing and don't need as much of a heavy hand in the editing process. But then you're also going to have people who are like, writing's not my thing. I'm not a writer. I'm just going to record myself talking, and then I have to take a transcription and turn that into something that is more of a polished chapter, which of course requires a heavier hand. Then there are even some authors where they've got some really great ideas, but they really need a lot of help in terms of structuring it, kind of the big picture of what the book is going to be about, how it's going to flow. We do a lot of that work when we're in the chapter mapping process, which is the very first phase after you solidify your concept before you write your book, getting a really solid map of your book written out from start to finish, so we understand how it's going to flow, what every chapter is going to include, and then from there it's just about getting the content onto the page or into the audio recording. You'll hear a lot of terms out there, especially if you've ever gone on Fiverr and tried to or get an editor off of Fiverr. You might be looking around and kind of confused at some of these terms where you're looking and one person just does line editing, another person does just proofreading, or somebody does line editing and proofreading, but then there's somebody else who's a developmental editor. What does all of this mean? So, again, I think that no matter who you are, you would benefit from someone who has the skills to do all of it, who has the agility and the ability to step back and see what it is that author truly needs to make their work shine. But if we're going with some of the basics here, when we look at line editing is focused a little bit more on style, structure, making a sentence flow better, things like that. If you look at proofreading, that's a little bit more of the deep dive, super nitty-gritty under a microscope. I'm looking at punctuation. I'm looking at spelling, typos, things like that. I'm looking at grammar. I want to make sure that it's error free. And then developmental editing is somebody who's looking at a bit of the bigger picture. Like I was saying, maybe somebody's coming with a concept to where it's a great concept, but they have no idea how to structure it, or it's just like a total brain dump of stuff with no specific structure or flow to it. That's where a developmental editor can come in and make sure that it is a well thought through concept. And when the reader goes through it, it's very cohesive and it has a really nice and logical flow to it. So those are the main types of editing that you're going to hear about. There's other editing out there, like, copy editing, which is frequently interchangeable with line editing. Line editing, copy editing is kind of the same thing. But yeah, those are the three major ones. So let's talk about the role of an editor, and more so the role of collaboration, because that's where this is coming from. I've had some extremely collaborative authors here lately, and they're just awesome. It's such an awesome, it's such a pleasure to work with them, and it's super exciting. It's clearly exciting for them. It's exciting for me, and just seeing the end product of what gets created through that highly collaborative process it's just such a satisfying experience. And it kind of has made me think back to, times when I've been talking to someone who has, none of our authors, but, from time to time, I talk to people who, have maybe already written a manuscript, and they're asking a few things, but they're highly protective of that manuscript and they don't want anyone touching it. I've heard people before say that they were their own editor, which there is no such thing. That's a big mistake. So don't ever make the mistake of being your own editor. You cannot. Period. You cannot be your own editor. I've written multiple books and I have never edited my own book. And I'm an editor, right? I have an editor who edits my books. It's so important, not just from the specialization side of things in terms of getting an editor involved and collaborating on your project. That's somebody who highly specializes, trained, educated, and experienced in making sure that what you have written is the best possible output that it can be. But that's also somebody who's going to have an outside perspective of yours. And that perspective, just the perspective of another person, can go a long way in highlighting things that internally you thought flowed well or you thought made sense, but another reader is going to read it and either understand it differently in terms of, it's not even the way you intended it, or not understand it at all, to look at something and be like, hey, I have no understanding of what you're talking about or what this is, or, you should put a little bit more information over here about this, because you start talking a little bit about it, but then you move on to the next thing. There are so many things that we as writers take for granted that are sort of unconscious competent for us, that when we start writing it, we don't realize how much background or how to put in to help a novice reader understand, or how much information to put in there to help somebody understand that, aside from an editor, just an additional perspective can really, really make sure that there are no blind spots in your final manuscript. Back before I was, a chief editor at Smart Publishing, I had a very, very long stemming career in learning and development and internal communications. And one of the huge things across both of those disciplines that you learn is you learn about the importance and you gain the skill of audience perspective. So when most writers write, they're writing from their brain and they're writing from what resonates with themselves and what makes sense to themselves, because that's, you've never been trained to have different perspectives. And so oftentimes that's where opportunities can arise, where we can explain something a little bit more, or explain something a little bit differently, or add a little bit information on a certain topic, so that the reader, the person who's reading it, can better understand what you're saying, or can better appreciate what you're saying as well. Well, in learning and development, and internal communications, what we're creating, the entire success of it is dependent upon a specific audience understanding it and receiving it well. And so everything that we create or we draft has a specific audience segment in mind. And it's not just one audience, it's multiple audiences, So we may have something that is intended for a broad audience in a company. For example, we may have something else that is intended for a smaller segment, people of one specific job type. And those people are very different from another job type. Their motivations are different. Their reading level is different. Their internal beliefs, system is a little bit different. And so the way that we draft something for that audience is going to be wholly and completely different from the way we draft something for a different audience, right? And so having that lens, or having somebody like an editor who can bring and offer a different perspective is so important, because it is going to be reflective of the end result, which is someone who ends up with your book and is reading it. That person's not going to be you. Of course, you're probably going to read your own book several times, right? But other people, your end audience, those are going to be the people who are reading your book, and it needs to factor in that audience perspective. And if it doesn't, you may lose your readers. You may lose them early, you may lose them midstream, just because either things you're saying are going over their head, or it's not exactly being communicated in a way that sits right with them. So all that is to say, that is a really, really big part of why you should always, as an author, invite collaboration, and invite collaboration, not just from your editor, but one of the things that we do as well, when it makes sense, when we have a book where we're not quite sure how it's going to land, or we need more feedback, is we use something called beta readers. Beta readers are people that are essentially your target market, your end user, the people you're writing for. And we give them an advanced release copy of your book. So a copy, before the final form. We have them read it, and we have them give feedback. And it's so incredible when we go through this process that, even myself as an editor and the author, sometimes there are things that beta reader audience spots that we didn't even catch, that help us to go back and either revise something, add a little bit more information, whatever it may be, to make the book that much better. And so, yes, at the end of the day, the author is the author. You're the author of the book. It's your idea. It's your concept. It's your information. But it is the role of collaboration in terms of your editor, and in terms of if you even get beta readers involved, that make your book shine and make it the best and most impactful book it can possibly be. So I think that's my biggest message for today, is to be open to feedback, to be, to really want, your book to shine, and to really be more concerned with the reader experience than with being concerned about whether you did things perfectly. It's all about where things end up, and no matter who you are, it's always going to be better as a team effort. So thanks for listening today. Like I said, I'm just kind of getting back into the groove here after taking a week off. So if I rambled at parts, I appreciate you guys staying with me. I hope you really got, what I was saying in terms of, editing, the role of editing, the role of collaboration, and how important that is to having a really, really great book that gets published that has the best impact it can possibly have on readers. Be open to feedback, invite it. Think of it as just another part of this writing process. Writing should never happen in a complete vacuum. If something is confusing or unclear, we want to be able to prevent that on the front end, so that, the very first edition of a book that we put out is a really, really solid edition. where readers go through it, they get it, they love it, and it makes an impact on their lives. And it's a great reading experience. Next week, I'm going to have our lawyer on. I've already teased this in a previous episode. We're going to talk about intellectual property rights. And we are also going to talk about the role of defamation and why authors need to understand defamation and how they can protect themselves from it, as well as when it comes to intellectual property rights, what they can do if they feel like their rights have been violated. That episode, I'm recording it next week, but it's going to come out the week after. The one that you get next week will probably be another solo episode of me rambling about something. But then after that, it'll be me and Michael talking through some exciting legal stuff. So it'll be an extended episode, probably somewhere around 45, 50 minutes. I'm really, really excited about that one. Yeah. So as always, I'm Renée Lautermilch for Smart Publishing, and I want you to keep writing your story, get collaborative, definitely involve an editor, and we're happy to help with anything that we can. So until next time, keep writing your story because the world needs your voice.